Welcome. This is a Senior Life Academy located on the campus of the University Park United Methodist Church in Dallas, Texas. I'm Dee Dee Cassata. Today we're going to talk about judgment. Our panel members are Diana Wilson, Stephen Fleming, Miriam Mathis, and Bob Monroe. Judgment is a tricky thing. We can talk about the judgment day as far as Christians are concerned, or we can talk about our own role in being judgmental. The Bible tells us that we should not judge, that God is the ultimate judge, and He's the perfect judge. Is that how you see God, as a perfect judge, Diana?
No, but I know the scripture you're talking about. For me, the overarching definition of God is love. Mm-hmm. And so I think the judgment comes if you look at the scriptures in terms of their Jewish context. I mean, the people who wrote them and the people they were writing to mostly were Jews. I don't know, though, in Matthew, is that true? Or was the author of Matthew writing to Jews?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It's believed, yes. His target audience was.
So in that's why I think that language is there.
Well, if we're not to judge, and you don't believe that God ultimately judges, what about Judgment Day?
Well, for me, all of those words about judgment are metaphors. They're a way of us trying to understand doing well in our life and not so well. And I think what the author of Matthew was trying to do is motivate people to, stand up, sit up, and pay attention and do what was theirs to do.
Well, Stephen, what do you think the scripture meant when we're not supposed to judge? Judge not, that ye be not judged.
Well, I do believe there's a really valid place for taking judgment into consideration when we talk about our faith. And I think Jesus may have been describing that it will certainly feel like judgment for those who have rejected the love of God, that in some existential end-of-life awareness.
And there is a fear, I think, of some people about Judgment Day. How will they measure up? So is Judgment Day a real thing, or is it, as Diana thinks, a metaphor for something else?
Well, some people, when they refer to Judgment Day, call it that great getting up morning.
Great.
It's not like it's going to be a horrible thing, but it'll be a day of, when, as elsewhere in Scripture it says, we see now through a glass darkly, but then we shall be seeing face to face. And, there's a hope that we have as Christians that is in contrast to the world that doesn't have a hopeful future, perhaps because of a sense of futility about life. There's no end point. It's almost connected to our Christian idea of perfection. It's not that we're trying to reach the goal per se, but we're going on with hopefulness about what God has in store, and it changes your understanding. I think there's also an important difference between judgment and discernment.
Oh, absolutely.
And in the sense that God is the perfect judge, God is the one who ultimately knows what is best for us and what is not good for us. And for us to align ourselves with that kind of insight into ourselves and to what the world throws at us, we would wish to have that kind of discernment that God has. So there's another way in which judgment can be used other than just...
But judgment is probably more real than we think if we consider that evil should deserve some condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why we have the justice system we have, so that if people do things wrong... I sat on a couple grand juries, and regular juries too, for that matter. And part of the basic premise of social justice is that there are consequences for your action, and if you're a dangerous person, it doesn't hurt to take you out of society so that you can't hurt other people. And I think that's necessary. When Richard Rohr talks about non-dual thinking, he says that we need to be careful that we don't throw out analytical thinking. It's very necessary. I mean, we need it to operate in the world, but we just need to know that there's more, that there are other ways of knowing and seeing, especially if you talk about big things like love and death and mystery.
How do you see judgment, Marion?
Well, I was a little confounded by the topic at first, and I started reading up on judgment in the New Testament, or when the judgment day would occur, and the end times, and it kind of verified what I sensed, but didn't know how to articulate, in that each one of the Gospels has, and also the epistles and Acts has a way of talking about judgment that in some cases puts it right in the face of encountering Jesus. So like in the present, not in the future necessarily. So people who accepted Jesus and his teachings would be the elect, would be the friends, would be the ones who are chosen, and then everybody else would not be in that category. So there was that element where I had sensed that it would be as Jesus was living, and now as we are encountering his commandments, his presence in other people, what we do with that, we are kind of judging ourselves, or making a decision that will judge us ultimately. And so it's not just all going to happen when we pass on to
At the ultimate time.
the ultimate time. It's already started. And some of the things that I read talked about how in some of the Gospels, Jesus, and I'm not going to say this correctly, but I think it might be in the Synoptic Gospel, they talk about how God, or how Jesus' death and resurrection was the beginning of looked at as the beginning of the end times. Is that right?
How does that relate to the second coming of Christ, Bob?
I don't know. That's a long ways from judgment to where my mind was going. But
Where was your mind going?
the word judge has multiple uses. You know, somebody said, you know, God is the ultimate judge. I don't think there's a problem with that. You know, should we judge others? Well, maybe we need, if you don't like the word judge, because that says you are deciding whether that person is a good person or a bad person. You certainly, like Stephen said, you need to discern, is that person's actions something I want to follow or respect or be involved with? If not, then you avoid that behavior or that person. And judging, one way I've thought about it, is another way of measuring. And I think it may have been Diana said, you know, we measure ourselves all the time. That's one of the things, we have a lot of lessons from Jesus, is what our behavior should be, how do we measure up, and to that degree, we are judging ourselves in one way or another, our lives, if we're conscious. Are we measuring up? And we may be the judge or a judge at the end of time, and God is the ultimate judge. But I would think at our point, we would already have an idea how well we measured up and what our failings were, and thank God for Jesus dying on the cross and saving us from all those places we didn't measure up.
Can I interject something
Sure.
here? Because I think I read something about the Gospel of Matthew and how Matthew would be shocked at the way we read it today. And that's where I was coming from earlier when I said he was Jewish and writing to a Jewish audience. And it's because with the focus on judgment, we lose the primary message, which is social justice and caring for others and being of service. And that when Jesus gets really mad, it's when people are being taken advantage of.
Absolutely,
It
absolutely.
reminds
Do
me
you
of
see a
eucalyptus.
distinction also between judgment and criticism? We are more critical, perhaps, than judgmental, but there is a line there of being critical of either something or somebody. Is that a judgment?
I think it's an assessment.
It's an assessment.
It can be. I mean, it could be either. It could be both.
I think, doesn't it may be affected by the attitude you look at criticism. You can criticize somebody's behavior without criticizing the person. And sometimes in our society, when we disagree with somebody or their actions, we can be very, very critical and hurtful about a person. And we don't separate sometimes what we disagree with, and we become, I guess you would say, judgmental about that person just because we might disagree with them on a certain point. A lot of the things are that we might disagree with could be approved by somebody else and not necessarily wrong. So much in our society, we take another person's opinion as being right or wrong. It's polarizing.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that is apparent in our everyday life is that we're highly critical, and that leads, in my opinion, as Bob says, to maybe overjudging and not discerning the difference between the issue and the person.
I think, though, that people run into that all the time, whether they're supervisors or parents or teachers, that you're always running into something that you think there's something somebody else shouldn't be doing. And I think most good parents and good teachers and good administrators figure out that it's the behavior, not the value of the person that's in question.
But not everyone feels that way. Sometimes they really, that's right, as Bob says, they attack the person and rather than the issue. How do we interpret the eye of the needle? When Jesus said it's the camel going through the eye of the needle is almost impossible. How do you all see that?
I interpret it as one of his many statements to tell people that they should not be hoarding wealth. They should be helping the poor. They should be helping give justice in this world, and that people who gain material assets and hoard them and don't help others, the needy, then that's going to be a very difficult thing at, as we said earlier, Judgment Day. That could be, that's certainly not measuring up to Jesus' love and what he was trying to convey.
That line comes after the story of the rich young man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the context for it is somebody who wants to follow Jesus and doesn't want to give up his wealth.
Yeah, but my point is when you read the messages in the New Testament, and there's some in the Old, that you don't do that. You help the poor, you help the widow, you help the
it's
orphan.
a common theme.
Over and over again, and I thought the story about the rich man and he didn't want to give up his goods was just one more illustration that he was trying to make that point.
Well, let's be honest. I don't know how many of us would remember Jesus' extreme condemnation of the young man, the rich young ruler, if he hadn't used such a hyperbolic statement like that. And that's true of many of the times in which Jesus wanted to make a radical emphasis.
It also
on
had
how,
some humor in it, did it not?
Oh, maybe. I hadn't even thought about that, but it was just, you don't forget a story like that. It catches on real
It's
early.
kinda absurd.
As a
Yeah.
child, you remember a story like that.
Yeah.
And it's typical of a lot of the hyperbolic language of the Middle Eastern culture, too. But Jesus didn't use that kind of extreme language all the time either, but he used it on occasions when he really wanted to make it a point. This isn't just some, maybe yes, maybe no kind of situation. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoa, you know,
Very
I better
stark.
think seriously about
Then you have to
accumulating
define rich.
riches. Maybe I need to think seriously about whether I want to spend my life accumulating riches or not.
Telling the fishermen to drop their living, their boat, their nets, and come with me, follow me. To those fishermen, that was all they had. And so the riches may vary with the person.
But I remember in that story of the rich young man, Jesus was sad. And the young man was sad, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't get rid of that burden. He couldn't unburden himself enough. And, you know, Jesus was all about alleviating burdens, but if people are not willing to take them off or let go of them, then he can't be of any help.
Who went away sad, Jesus or the rich young ruler?
I think it was the rich young man, but I think Jesus, you know, I don't know, I have this feeling that Jesus was sad too.
Or maybe disappointed is
Disappointed.
Yeah.
disappointed is a better word.
But, you know, I love this story because it fits if the kingdom of the heaven is at hand, if it is here, if it's not some faraway pie in the sky place that you get to if you've done
And that's
all the
what
right
Marion
things.
was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
That right here, right now, this young man can't do it because he's got other priorities.
Well, we could continue this conversation all afternoon. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. We would love to hear from you. Our email is at the bottom of the screen, and we would like for you to contact us and tell us what you think about what we think about judgment. In the meanwhile, may God surround you with His presence.